All right. Al, it's always a little tough telling whether we're live, but I'm pretty sure we are.
Hi, everyone.
Good to see everybody. Al will start the, I hate to call it formal. You're not a real formal person, but the real meat of our discussion in about 8 minutes. But Al, I wanted to hear, first of all, kind of ask everybody if they can hear us and see us okay. So how about if you can, over there, and Al is right over here, right? There's a chat screen there.
Doug is over
It's
there.
over there now. Okay. So
No, I'm saying chat screen's over there. Doug is over there.
yeah, we can't tell on this who's seeing what. So anyway, there's a gray bar, probably to your left, and that is a chat screen. And if you would type in there that the video and the audio is okay, please do that and kind of let us know that you can hear us okay. And then after you do that, we'd love to hear where you're from and maybe what you're having to drink. And meanwhile, I think, Al, tell me a little bit about your trip to Mexico.
2 weeks ago, I got to go down to Chihuahua, Mexico, to judge in the Copa Cerveza, Mexico. That was my first experience with international judging. It was a commercial competition, and if anybody gets an opportunity, it gets an invite to go down there, I would highly recommend it. They're very, Jose Ruiz is the organizer. They showed us a great time. It was a great competition, 900 beers. And you know, I guess when I went down there, I went down with my friend Paul Dienhart, and we were expecting a lot of Corona-like beers or Negro Modelo, and they had the full range. They had the full range of beers that you'd see at any, at a GABF. It was some very good beers.
No kidding. American style also?
All styles, every style, even meads. They had a mead category as well.
Lambics?
Which I love. Lambics. I didn't judge lambics. I don't know, but I would presume lambics were there.
Okay. So I see, let's see. A couple of folks have said, Jim Price and Nathan, thank you for joining us. They both say, apparently we must be coming in clear. And I got a confirmation from my bride that she says we're coming in clear. So we will start again the real meat of this in about 5 minutes. So any of you that have joined us early, again, I would encourage you.
Get your beers.
Yeah, that's right. So share what you got there.
This is from a brewery that I have part interest in Minneapolis. I have to shade here so people can read the label.
Yeah.
Udapils, which is a great story behind that. Udapils is a Norwegian word that means having a beer outside with friends on the first nice day of spring after a long winter.
Wow.
Udapils.
That's a small word with a long definition.
It is. Cheers.
Cheers. Well, I am having a Dapple Dog. And this is a Irish stout that I snagged as part of the North Carolina Cup, which I was fortunate enough to judge. And Pitt Street did very well in the competition. And so I am going to start this guy. It's a category 15B, I think. Irish stout. If I can do this without spilling it on the computer.
Or banging it into your microphone.
Yeah, which I just did. But I'd rather bang the mic than hit the computer.
Yep, exactly.
So as a Cicerone, this is a totally inappropriate glass, but I happen to like these, so I'm going to use that anyway. So cheers.
I'll keep using the can so the label keeps getting seen.
I don't blame you. Let's see who else we got. I see Jim. Looks like Jackson, Missouri. Says he can hear us great. He's drinking an Oscar Blues 1050. Oh, that's a good beer.
Is Nick still online? We saw him sign in way early. He was in St. Paul drinking a Boom Island. Lemon Drop Wits.
Let's see. I can look and actually see. I do not see Nick on there yet. So I don't think so. Let's see. Sorry, I have to kind of duck around to get around cameras and microphones, but the beer's still good. And again, for those of you that are on a few minutes early, we will start in about 3 minutes. I promise I like to try and start these on time. I like to end them on time. And the way we'll do this is at the top of the hour, I'll introduce Al. We'll kind of jump into his presentation very, very quickly. If it goes as long as 30 minutes, we will stop at 30 minutes, and we'll call that the meat of the program, and then we'll get into the Q&A. It looks like we've got about 6 questions. So there in the maybe center of the screen, Al,
ask a question.
Yeah, do you see that? Ask a question. That's a great place. Al is actually
it's right there on my screen.
Okay.
Everybody sees it a little differently, I think.
Anyway, bottom center, I think, on your complete screen. And if you'll click on that and type in the questions, do not put your questions in the chat. Excuse me. We're not going to have time to respond to the chat once we really get going. But if you put it in the questions in about 30 minutes, we will go through as many of those as we can. Al has actually typed a response to a number of them. And the cool thing is, if you ask a question, you will actually get an email when Al is answering the question, presuming I do it all right. And you'll get an email after that so you can click on it and actually see your question, answered right there. So you don't even have to watch the whole webinar to hear your question. So I love this interface. It just makes it very live. And even after it's over, we will continue to be able to answer some questions as long as Al is willing to do those.
Sure. I've got more beer where this came from. So,
all right. Well, I think it is the top of the hour, and we are ready to begin. So, welcome to the Hacking the BJCP Written Exam. And by the way, that was my title. It was not Al's choice. But I happen to kind of like that because I think Al is going to give us some inside scoop as to how to work our way through this. So
I'm going to debunk the title first.
Well, good. So, Al, again, I know you're having a beer. I'm having one too. So tell us about the beer you're having.
This is a Udapil's Receptional. It's their Oktoberfest, which it's out of print now. Unfortunately, it's past the season, but their newest beer is a red lager, also delicious. And if this goes on long enough, I'll probably too.
All right. And I have a Dapple Dog from Pitt Street in North Carolina. It's an Irish stout. I have it in the wrong glass, but I happen to like this. So enjoying it very much. So please share that in the chat as we're going through it. And I see we've got people from all over. Looks like a number of people in the Minnesota area. There's Sal from New Orleans, Jackson, Missouri. That's Jim. Let's see, St. Louis. We got Tim Cochran. We've got a number of folks on here, and I'm glad you've joined us. A lot of these folks, Al, as you know, are from our Facebook group. And if any of you are visiting and you have not joined our Facebook group for BJCP national candidates, and actually we've got a lot of nationals on there that are working their way to masters. So I'm not sure the title is perfect, but it gets the point across. So we've got about 140, I think. And it's a fun group and a serious group, so I'd encourage you to join us there. Looks like Jim is saying, hey, Sal. So, Quito, Ecuador. That's cool. South America's got some serious stuff going on.
Sounds like Nathan might have been at Copa Cerveza this year. So, hey Nathan.
So, We've got those folks here, so let's go ahead. I'm really excited about that, and let's go ahead and get this going. So Al is going to introduce his actually newest copy of the BJCP for Dummies. I don't know if everybody has downloaded it. There's a free download link. I have downloaded mine, got it all clipped up so I can go through it, and it's been very nice.
We'll be referring to it throughout this, so pull it up online, print it out, whatever you need to do.
Perfect. So most of you know how much Al has contributed to the BJCP. You heard about his recent judging in Mexico. Don't know if you know, he's a part owner of UTPills. Am I pronouncing that right?
UTPills. Pretend you're Norwegian.
I don't know if I can do that too well. And he is a BJCP Grandmaster 7 judge. So how many Grandmaster 7s are there, Al?
Just one right now. There's two ahead of me.
They're 8?
Gordon Strong and Steve Piatz are, I think, 10 and 9.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, it's a privilege to share the screen with you, and I won't slow things down anymore. So I think, Al, if you want to go ahead and jump into the meat of the topics here, and I'd love to hear more about how to get there, and because I'd like to get my chance to make it to national.
Okay. I've got some prepared notes, so I'm going to try to skim through these as quickly as I can. I can probably make these. Well, I've sent them to Doug. So Doug, if you want to publish these later on your site, you can do that too. But just going to go through some stuff you probably already know about nationals. To qualify to take the national exam, you need to have at least 10 judging points. You need to be a national or higher rank, or have an 80 or higher on the tasting score. The test itself, the national written exam, is a 90-minute test. There's 2 parts. The first is true-false, 20 questions. These are all published. These are online with the answers. They're online, so there's really no reason for you to not nail that. They're pretty much common sense also. So they're 124 questions. It's on the BJCP site. You don't get any credit for the true-false parts of the test. However, you do get a deduction for each question. It's a ½ point deduction for each one that you get wrong. So don't get any wrong.
Al,
there should be no reason.
There was a question on that, and it was mine. I think historically in the past, they might have switched the true and the false in the sentence. That's the rumor, but that's not true now. Is that correct?
I don't really understand. Sometimes
rephrase
in the BJCP dummies,
so that it.
I think in the dummies guide, it gives an example of a question can be asked in one of 2 ways, and one can turn out to be true and one can be false. It's not meant to be a trick. It's just rephrasing. One might say a contest organizer may be a judge in the competition as long as he is not aware of the entrance. Another way to phrase that is a competition organizer may not be a judge in an exam, blah, blah, or in a competition, blah, blah, blah. It's just one's true, one's false, obviously. So if that's what you meant.
That's exactly right.
I'm not sure. Okay. So it's not meant to be a trick. It's just you need to read the questions carefully.
Okay.
Going on. So after the true-false questions, then you have 5 questions. There's 5 essay questions. They're hard. They come from a pool of 10 questions, which are all published on the BJCP site. I'm going to go over them all tonight. So these questions they're published. You can study them. Get a group, get some flashcards. You can study them. You get 100 points for each essay question. So there's a total of 500 points available for the test. If you do the math, you have 90 minutes. I count the true-false as 1 question. So you have 90 minutes to do 6 questions. That's 15 minutes per. Do not go over. Get yourself a watch. Look at it. Even though you say, man, I'm going to ace this recipe question, I'm going to write 5 pages on it, resist the temptation. In fact, my recommendation is if you've written more than 1 page for a question, you've probably written too much. And I'm going to show you how to do that tonight. Like I said, all essay questions and their answers, they're all published in the BJCP study guide. The essay portion is always in the same format. There's, as I mentioned, 10 possible questions, so you won't be surprised. 2 of the questions are always about beer styles. They say here's 3 beers. You need to describe them. You need to compare and contrast. The questions that those beers are, the beers that those questions are about are from categories 1 through 26. So you don't need to learn anything past beer category 26. In fact, I'll mention there's 2 styles in those categories that aren't in there also, but just learn all of the 1 through 26 styles. How do you do that? You just got to learn them. There's no hack for it. You need to know those styles. Let's see, where am I?
So is that just index cards or whatever method you like to use?
Yeah, I'd say flashcards. That's great. Get a study buddy or a study group. Just quiz each other on it. Yep. There's 1 question on recipe formulation. There's only 12 possible beers that they're going to ask you to write a recipe for. So that's only 12 beers that you have to learn how to make that recipe. And I'm going to show you in the dummies guide. I'm not going to show you tonight, but it's in the dummies guide how you can really dumb that down. You can pick the average range for those beers and say this beer is about 1050, and that's going to be the case for about 8 of those beers. So if you just learn, that's your OG for 8 of the 12 beers. That's a good hack, I think, using your word. There's going to be 1 question about beer characteristics. I used to call it troubleshooting, but under the new test, the BJCP exam director renamed it beer characteristics question. There's 14 beer characteristics that are published. If you dig it up, what those characteristics are, they're right in the study guide. How to correct them, that's all in materials available on the BJCP website. Another possible question from that beer characteristics is what is body and mouth feel, which I think is the simplest question that you could possibly get. So there's 5 elements, right? You've written score sheets, so there's five elements for mouthfeel. Body is one of them. So if there's a trick question, that's it. Is that body is not a separate thing. Body is a part of mouthfeel. And so if you go to mouthfeel, you've got body, carbonation, warmth, creaminess, astringency. You've got to describe them. You've got to say how to control them. You've got to say a style that represents each one of those things. That's the question. It's an easy question. There is 1 question about ingredients or brewing process. And these are, so far, believe it or not, we've covered 4 questions, 4 of the 10 possible questions. The remaining 6 are under this category. You're only going to get 1 of them. 1 is discuss hops. 1 is discuss water characteristics. Another is discuss malt and yeast. It's a twofer. Another one that I think is one of the easiest questions, define krausening, adding gypsum, and finings. Everybody knows that. The next one I think is probably one of the harder ones, which is to define diastatic and proteolytic enzymes. And the last question is describe the malting process, which I don't think is hard, but it is exhaustive. You've got to write a lot in a very short period of time to really totally cover the mashing process. That's all the questions. That's all the questions that you're going to be asked, one of those 10. So dig in, you'll have to learn them. What I'm going to show you, what the dummies guide tries to do is shows you how to present that material, how to organize that material, to save your aching hand. One of the biggest people who out there, well, I can't see, raise your hand, but if you've tried to take this test before, one of the biggest problems is hand cramping. Yep, just hand cramping, is an issue, and everybody types now, so nobody writes anymore. So I'd say practice writing. Take 90 minutes and pick yourself 6 questions and try to write them out. Get your hand in shape before you take that exam. But what I'm going to show you is in the dummies guide. You could sum it up by saying grids and bullets. And one of our questions, which should we answer this right now,
Sure.
Doug? One of the questions that came up. Let me pull it up here.
I'll read it for you.
All right, go ahead.
Which was the one
from Omer?
From Omer? All right, so I'll read it out, and we have a system here. That's how they get. How they get.
I'll have it.
Okay, yeah. All right, so we're going to start answering from Omer Bashaya, and if I have screwed up that name, I'll do that. I apologize. In the BJCP exam for dummies, you're suggesting to write everything in tables. This is also backed up with other graders' notes. Yet, other graders also say they appreciate independent thought, and that this is not easy to do in tabular form. How do you suggest we display independent thought and still use tabular form?
So grids and bullets is my little buzzwords for saying tabular form. So you create yourself a grid, and inside you just bullet your answers. You don't write full sentences. You just put a bullet and you say, and you don't even have to say aroma, and you don't even have to say stout, because you're going to be in a box that says aroma and stout. I think you can get more independent thought into a grid if you're using this format. If you think about it, if you do not use a grid or a table system, you're going to be writing this all prose. And if somebody says, tell me everything about those three styles, and oh, by the way, compare them, tell me the similarities and differences in a page, in 15 minutes, all those three styles, it's really hard. If you think you've got to write, that's like practically a book. Well, we know there's whole books written about a style in the AHA. They publish whole books about them. If you try to digest or regurgitate all that in prose, you're going to be wasting a lot of time writing a and the, between, blah, 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 words that you don't need. If you are in a grid and you are if you are in the aroma row and you're under the stout column, you don't have to write aroma or stout at all in that grid. Doug, can you pull up that page from the dummies guide?
I can, I hope. So
I think this is going to give you an idea of what I'm shooting for if we can figure out how to do this.
I think I can.
It's on page 56 if you have your dummies guide. Well, you got rid of me, but I don't see
all right, give me.
Well, I'll just keep talking while you figure out how to pull it up. So if you imagine, two of the questions are style comparison questions. So this is a really good one to talk about because it's 40% of your entire grade. What I would do is create yourself a grid that across the top says your three styles. So there, if everybody can see that, there's the three columns across the top. Write your styles in there. And then down the side, put aroma, appearance, flavor, mouthfeel, everything you've got to do in that question. And now once you go to the column 1, let's say that's our stout question, and you go to the aroma row, now you can just put bullets. And what I would do is use your knowledge that you have of score sheets, because you've all been judging for a long time, hopefully. You've all got your 10 judging points at least. You all know under aroma, there's 4 things. There's 4 of those little key words on a score sheet. Write something about each one of those little key words. And so what have you got? You've got malt. You've got hops. You've got fermentation characteristics, and you've got other. Write something about each of those 4 items in that box. And you don't ever have to mention stout, and you don't ever have to mention the word aroma, because you're in the right box for it. Does that make sense? And you can use really independent thought in doing that. Use very robust language, just as if you were writing that score sheet that you're going to need to write to get your 90 someday. Be very, very descriptive in your language, and you'll see that this system works out really well. If you don't believe me, I would say fill in 3 styles from the study guide there. Take this sheet, print it out, fill in 3 styles, and fill it out. Time yourself how long it takes you to fill it out. And then, again, do that same question without grids and bullets. Time yourself how long it takes you to write it all out in prose. you'll find that the grids and bullets are going to save you a lot of time and a lot of hand cramping. So that answers the first question, I think.
All right. I'm going to click done answering. So, Omer, you should get that. And by the way, anybody else that's interested, when you go back through the questions, you'll be able to easily see those answered.
And by the way, everybody, if you see me like looking this way, it's because I'm looking at my little outline for tonight's presentation. I'm not ignoring you. So the next question. So you're going to get 2 questions on beer styles. That's very important. You've got to know how to compare them. How to compare them? Just learn those styles from styles 1 through 26 in the BJCP. If you learn them well, you don't really have to memorize the similarities and differences between those 3 styles, because you'll be able to formulate that, come up with that in real time, in real robust language on your own. If somebody says, tell me the difference between a American light lager and a Czech Pilsner and an international lager, you will know those 3 styles. And you'll say, what is similar about them? Well, they're all lagers. There you go. And what's different about them? You'll say one, you can have corn, right? One is probably got the purest water in the world and a very distinctive hop style. International lager, I'm not that familiar with that style, so can't spit that out, but you will be when you take the test. So learn the styles, and you'll find that compare contrast is not going to be a problem.
So, Al, is there there's risk with anything, because the graders are humans and they all have opinions, but is there a significant risk with going with bullets and tables?
If I'm grading it, no. I would say that you'll have to be the judge of that. Like I said, practice with grids, practice with pros, go with whatever you think you do best. You do best at that, where you can give the most information at. I got my 90 when I passed it using grids and bullets, so I know it can be done. And I know I've talked to other graders who have said, no way can you possibly get a master level or national level score using a grid. And I disagree with that. And I think it would be, I'm not calling I need to do a challenge, because the exam director hates those. But I'd say if you've answered the question and they're going to send you a copy of your test back, and you go over it and you say, I answered everything that they wanted me to answer here, then you've done your job and you should get your 90 or more.
Is the bigger risk just not completing it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I said you've got to have a watch, and you've got to give yourself 15 minutes for each question and then move on. Gilding the lily on something that you know really, really well is that's going to give you 100 points. And skipping another question is going to lose you 100 points. You can't do that. You not to get a national score. Moving on to the beer characteristics question. There's, like I said, there's 14 characteristics. They're all listed in the study guide and in the dummies guide. I have done my best to give you a table, of course, in the dummies guide that gives you the material you need to talk about those 14 beer characteristics. I don't recommend you memorize it. I recommend you internalize it. And when you fill out your test, write it in your own words. The graders, believe it or not, all have a copy of the dummies guide, whether they admit it or not. And if they see something that's quoted directly from the dummies guide, you're far more likely to get zinged for that rather than just regurgitating memorized material. You do have to memorize it, whether a grader thinks you don't or not. You do have to memorize this stuff. You have to dig in and do it. I'm just presenting a way that you can organize it. And I'm telling you, as a grader, I love it to see somebody does it in table fashion, not just because I wrote the dummies guide, but because it organizes it in a way that I want to read it. If I have to dig through prose to find every little detail that's in the question, that just takes more time than I want to give in grading that exam. Moving on then to the body mouthfeel question. Like I said, I think this is one of the easiest ones. Know that body is a subset of mouthfeel. It's not a separate thing from mouthfeel. And if you think of the mouthfeel part of your score sheet, that's the 5 things you got to talk about, right? Body, alcohol warmth, carbonation, creaminess, and astringency. That's what they're looking for. Except you only have to say 3 of them. You have to say body, and then 3 others. So you don't even have to say all 5. And recommendation, don't say all 5, because it's just wasting time that you don't have time to waste. Pick 3 of them other than body. You have to say body, but pick 3 others and answer them. If the question says give 3, give 3. If it says give 5, give 5. Don't give 6. If they say give 1 classic commercial example, give 1, because what if the other one's wrong? You want to risk getting, when I grade, if somebody says a right one and a wrong one, they just nullify each other. You don't get the point. So do exactly what they want, nothing more. Oh, another thing, when you're describing something like creaminess, don't say, it's that creamy feeling you get in your mouth when you're drinking a beer. You've got to come up with a synonym, because you can't define a word by using the word. Okay, does that make sense?
What word would you use?
Silky. I don't know. Get it thesaurus out and look it up. Pick your own word.
That's a great answer.
Look in the dummies guide. I have given some suggestions on how to answer that question. But again, don't memorize the dummies guide. Come up with your own words, or at least your own way of writing it back out. The recipe question. Here's an important number to remember, 18. There's 18 elements that a grader is looking for in the recipe question. There's 4 sections in the recipe question. The first is style description, which you already know what those 4 elements are, right? Doug, I'm asking you, what are the 4 elements?
Don't put me on the. Ooh, I'm doing all this stuff.
Yeah. Aroma, appearance, flavor, and we just said it, mouthfeel. Okay, those are your 4 elements when they're talking about style description, which is the first part of the recipe question. Second part is target parameters, OG, FG. They actually list these in the question. So you have no reason why not to put these in there, because they're asking you for them. The OG, FG, IBUs, SRMs, and the batch size. 5 elements there. Okay, so we're up to 9. Next thing they want is ingredients. What are the ingredients in beer, people? Grist, water, yeast, hops, right? 4 ingredients. Don't just list those 4 things. You're going to need to obviously extrapolate on that. Dummies guide shows you how to do it. I'm really proud, actually, of it's not exactly a grid, but it's a template for recipes. I'm really proud of the one that's in the dummies guide. You can use that. You can use that in your brewery for when you're writing your recipes. And if you internalize that grid, and remember there's 18 elements, you're going to do all right on this question. So, the last thing, there's 5 elements in ingredients. The 5th is, how are all of those ingredients appropriate to the style you're making? That's specifically asked also. And the last thing is brewing procedures. They mentioned 2 of the procedures. One is mashing, one is packaging, because this has to be an all-grain recipe. The other 2 things they don't mention, I count boil and chill together as one element, boiling and chilling. You can count them as 2 separate ones, I guess. But for the purposes of my 18 elements, I count them together. And then fermentation. So you've got mashing, boil and chilling, fermentation, packaging. That's your 4 elements. They add up to 18. So if you are writing your recipe out and you're numbering, I recommend numbering, and you don't come up to 18, you go, what am I missing? Something that the grader will be looking for and will take points off if you don't get it. Okay. If the beer style is a style that should be decocted, then you got more work, because you've got to go into more detail of how you're going to conduct that decoction, and decoction is complicated. I'm not going to go into, that's a whole nother lecture we can do another night, Doug. Decoction is its own thing, and you're just going to have to read up on it. Single step infusion. If you get one of those styles, you're in luck because that's just really easy, right? Mash at 153, color done. Okay, next is, we talked about style questions already. Oh, so ingredients questions. So for hops, there's 4 parts of the question. One is the characteristics. Characteristics, these are all in the dummies guide. You don't have to take notes. Antibacterial, preservative, bitterness, flavor, and aroma. Those are the characteristics that they're looking for. How you achieve them? Through, how do you extract them? Actually, the question is through isomerization, through boiling. And we all know that when you put them in the boil, it gives you different character to your beer, right? You've got bitterness, flavor, aroma. You've got to go through each of those 3 as sub-elements. Sounds like a great grid, actually, doesn't it? So the next thing is, say, 5 beer styles. I would pick 5 beer styles, specific hops, specific distinctive hops. I would pick 5 different countries, just because you got, obviously,
sure.
What's our hop? Saaz. Yeah. So we go, if you pick them from different countries, and you've got noble hops, and you've got continental hops, and you've got American hops, and so there's three more countries you can go to. So if you pick 5 different countries, you're going to have the most distinct hop styles. I would recommend that. Next ingredients question is water. This is a really hard question. John Palmer wrote a whole great book about it. You're not going to be able to write that book in 15 minutes. So you're going to have to give, right? You're going to have to give a grid. You're going to have to give something that summarizes those main points of water in 15 minutes. They ask, what are the 2 characteristics of water? I say minerals and salts. Somebody else might have a different answer, but I think that's a really good answer. 2 methods to adjust and control pH, salts and acids. 4 beer styles. Again, pick 4 different countries with 4 very distinct kinds of water. Oh, sure. Starting again with Czech Pils is going to be really good. Picking an English Pale Ale. Why? Burtonized water. Burtonized, I mean, everybody gets that. So, okay, then moving on to the malt and yeast question. The first part of the question says types of malts. I would say use broad strokes here. They're, pick, and here's the ones I would use is base malts, toasted malts, crystal malts, roast malts, and non-barley. Rather than saying specifically, 60 caramel, 60-degree caramel. That's just, you're not going to be able to get the broad strokes. You can then fill in with examples of those in your grid. Okay. So then they say 4 beer styles that come from specific types of malt. And if you can put this in the same grid as you just created for that first part of the question. So if you say Czechoslovakian, Pilsner malt, there's your beer style. There's only one. Yeast strain selection considerations. They say choose 5. Here's a bunch of them. These are in the dummies guide too. Don't have to write them down. Attenuation, alcohol tolerance, flocculation, temperature, ester phenol production, and diacetyl production. If I had to leave one out, I would leave out the diacetyl production because the other 5 are more important. And then, of course, you have to describe what all those things are, but those are the ones they're looking for. Okay, so that's the ingredients questions. There's 3 questions left we haven't talked about, and then I'll be done talking. How are we on time, Doug?
We're at the bottom of the hour. So just a reminder, everybody, this is recorded. So if you need to jump off, we understand it. If you don't, we'd love for you to hang on because we got 3 more questions to go through, and then we get into the Q&A. It looks like we got 8 questions there, and would love to have you for the rest of the program. So I would say continue on, Al.
I'll go real fast with these 3 questions, these 3 brewing questions. Again, first one is the one that I think is the easiest. Krausening, gypsum, and finings. What are they? Describe how they affect the finished beer. Sounds like a grid to me. Krausening, adding active fermenting wort to a wort that has finished fermenting. And you need to know why you're doing that and what cause it has to that beer. I'm not going to tell you, look it up. Gypsum is calcium sulfate. Again, see the dummies guide for the explanation for what gypsum is. You probably already have it memorized because you use it in every single batch of beer you make, pretty much. Finings, it's a compound added to the primary or secondary to clarify the beer. Probably get you some extra points if you give a few examples of each of those, you know, during the boil, during the chill, during the
different types, isinglass and Irish Moss and all that.
Right, and where you use them and how you use them and what they do. Yep. That's one question. The next question is diastatic and proteolytic enzymes. The Dummies Guide goes into great detail on this, and I'm just going to give you a few hints. Proteolytic, think protein, protein. So that's a good way to remember it. It works on proteins. It's active between 113 to 127 Fahrenheit. Memorize. Sorry, just have to do it. Diastatic. Yep, diastatic. Here's a little hint. Proteo is protein. Diastatic. Dia means two. Diastatic has two parts to it. Beta amylase and alpha amylase. Why the beta amylase comes first in the boil, I don't know. I remember that as alpha amylase enzymes. Think of alpha male. They're at the top, so they're the highest part of the boil. That's my little mnemonic for it. Come up with your own. Yep. So diastatic works on starches, not instead of proteins. At beta amylase is active 130 to 150, the lower part of the temperature. Alpha is active 149 to 158. You'll need to give more detail than that, but the Dummies Guide goes into how to do that. Last question, people. Mashing process. First part of the question is what happens in the mash? And there are several elements that work really good in a grid. Is milling, dough in, acid rest, protein rest, saccharification, which are what? Beta and alpha. We just talked about that. And the mash out. Those are the parts of the mash. Whatever kind of mash you're doing, those are the parts of the mash. Then it says pick 3 mashing techniques. Just give them 3. There's the ones that I know of as single step infusion, decoction, and serial mash, which is a double mash. There you have it. So those are the 10 questions. Learning all of that is hard, but there's only 10 questions and you can be ready for them. There's no reason for you to be surprised by a question on the BJCP exam. You should at least have seen that question before. And if you're smart, you've probably written it out a few times. Just give yourself homework. Start out easy. Say, I'm going to answer the MASH question in 15 minutes. Give yourself a blank piece of paper. Over here, you can stare at the question. I always like to, at the beginning of the question. Oh, by the way, in the Dummies Guide, there's a lined paper that they'll give you for your test. So print out some of that lined paper and use that. Don't write in the margins because anything in the margin is not going to be photocopied. Easy enough. Don't write on the back side of the paper. Use a brand new sheet of paper. My wife opened the door, so I'm covering up the brilliant light.
It's really okay.
All right. But then give yourself that blank piece of paper, pick a question, set the timer and go 15 minutes. Write it down. Do that with every question. You'll be fine. You'll get your 90.
Well, that's what we're all gunning for. And I think we've got almost 150 people that are gunning for that 90.
All right. Well, I'm done with my little prepared part of the presentation. So go ahead with your questions.
It looks fine behind you, but if you want to jump up there and do anything about it while I read the question, that's fine.
No, I'm good. I'll just move my head over here to the side a little bit. It looks like she shut the door now. So
okay, so we're going to take these in order. Looks like from Sean Kinnis. And again, I apologize if I have pronounced it wrong. And let's see, start answering, click. All right, so what are some of the most common errors made while preparing for the exam, and how can we avoid them?
And I've typed this out. I'm not going to read it, but I'll just regurgitate it from my knowledge. And the number one thing is time management. Probably the number two thing is that hand cramping that I talked about. I've talked about some people say I got through the fourth question and I could not write anymore. Only one way you're going to do that is build up that muscle, build up your hand, and practice. For the first part, practice answering questions in 15 minutes. As I said in this typed up answer, don't get stuck on a question that you know really well and you just want to gild the lily and just really nail that one at the expense of spending more than 15 minutes on it. What's worse is if you have an underanswered or an unanswered question, that's going to kill you. So use your watch, stick to that 15-minute rule. If you get extra time because you were able to breeze through those true-false questions in 5 minutes, save it for the end. Still stick to the 15-minute rule on all the other questions. And at the end, hey, you got 10 minutes to go back and gild the lily on that recipe question or whatever. But really, really stick to the 15 minutes.
Al, how many pages, if you can answer this, is the average written exam when somebody submits it?
Well, this is controversial because it goes back to my theory that you can get all the information you want in a grid and bullet. If you think of that, 6 or 5 pages. But I've seen people turn in 20 pages.
Wow.
And most of it is just bullshit, you know. And it's pardon my French, but if the grader has to step through bullshit, you're gonna annoy him or her. You're gonna bore them, and you're gonna say, this person is just using words to fill up 20 pages and make me be impressed. I think if you do a grid and bullet properly, you can answer each question in 1 page. Really.
Well, yeah.
Try it. You know, like I said, I encourage your listeners to try both ways. Take one question and answer it with a grid and bullet, and then stop. And maybe not in the same night because your hand's going to be all this and you'll be jittery. But then the next night, give yourself 15 minutes, same question, write it out in prose. You're going to miss stuff. And you know what? If you have a grid and you have a big empty cell there, it's going to remind you to go back later and put something in that cell. If you're writing prose, there's going to be nothing to remind you.
Yeah, but that says a lot. Worst case is 20 pages, and this might be 5 or 6. This is huge. All right. If you're done, we'll move to the next question.
Yep.
All right. So this is from Nick. I am practicing writing out answers to the exam questions under a time constraint. However, I'm not sure how to evaluate my work. For example, on the style comparisons, if I forgot to note malt aroma in describing a German Pils, how much of a deduction is that? Are materials presumably used by the graders available to us, future test takers? I'd be interested in gauging my progress if this were possible.
Yep. Short answer is yes. All grader materials are available on the BJCP website. The BJCP is extremely transparent. We want you to become nationals. Why? A, so you can be cool. B, so you can help us grade exams. So you all know that once you become a national, you're going to be put upon to start grading exams. And we need exam graders. Boy, do we need exam graders. So all the material that the graders have is all available to you on the exam tab on the website. How you can evaluate your work. Nick, if you're the Nick I think you are, let's have a beer. Write your questions up and buy me a beer, and I'll evaluate your work. If you're not the Nick I think you are, or you're somewhere else in the country, you're going to need a study buddy or a study group. And just be brutal. You know, be brutal with each other. Write out your questions and say, hey, maybe meet at the bar once a week and say, this week we're writing the recipe question. Everybody come, bring your recipe question. Just pass it to the guy on your right and grade it like you're a grader and say, oh, man, you didn't mention anything about water. You didn't mention anything about hops. Because if you're brutal with each other, that's going to do nothing but prepare you for the exam better.
All right. We will move to the next one. This looks like this is from Nathan. A lot of information out there is outdated and old. i.e. fix. I'm not sure what that is.
George Fix, I presume he means, which is a great textbook, but it's a 40-year-old textbook.
Shows my ignorance. So what is the most up-to-date and relevant place to find information for studying for the written exam outside of the study group provided by the BJCP? Oh, and I did not click my button. Let me repeat that again, if you don't mind. A lot of information out there is outdated, i.e. the fix publications. What is the most up-to-date and relevant place to find information for studying for the written exam outside of the study guide provided by the BJCP?
The study guide provided by the BJCP. That's the most actually the most recent is now the Dummies Guide, which you all have. I like it. It's pretty good. The style guidelines. And again, there's no hack for this. You just have to know the stuff. You know, the how to brew style books provided by sold by the AHA. Those are all good. But you know, the material that you're going to be tested on is all in the BJCP. So and the styles that you're going to be tested on are from the style guidelines. And if there is going to be a challenge, it's going to say, well, the style guidelines say this, and that's what you're going to quote. So style guidelines, really, really good. And the material on the BJCP website, all really, really good also. And hey, use the Dummies Guide as a jumping off platform. If there's something you disagree with, hey, here's a request. Something you disagree with in the Dummies Guide, and you find a source out there that is not what I said, let me know. I'll fix it.
And to that end, there's also everybody that's in the Facebook group, our study group for BJCP Nationals. I have posted the most recent versions of that study guide, confirmed that's the most recent one, and we have Al's report or study guide on there also. So I will move on to the next one and try and get this correctly. So this is from me, actually. The written exam seems to be mostly a test of how well we've memorized correct facts and whether we can write the answers adequately in the allotted time. So where can we find the most accurate facts to memorize with the least amount of unnecessary information?
Wrote here, and I'll just repeat it because, man, it's a big can of worms. Somebody else had, I think Nathan had mentioned a lot of graders want you to show original thought, original content. So how do you do that if you're regurgitating and memorized stuff? If you're really good at memorizing, you might be able to regurgitate what I wrote in the Dummies Guide word for word. You might be able to say, according to page 27 of John Palmer, here's what he writes about water. Don't. Put it in your own words. But how do you memorize it? Yeah, sorry, got to memorize it. No way around. No two ways around that. You got to learn the styles. Good news is there's only 10 questions, and they're published. So don't waste your time learning about stuff for the purposes of the exam. Anything you learn is not a waste of time in brewing. And you all know by now, every time you learn something, you learn how much more there is to learn. It's pretty much endless. But for the purpose of the exam, there's only 10 questions. So, you know, that's the beauty part. You can funnel down, say this is, if you don't want to waste time, just learn those 10.
Well, and it sounds like keeping it short but succinct. I mean, it sounds like our goal is to get it down to those 5 or 6 pages to make it practical to write it out.
Write as many pages. You know, if your grid needs to go 2 pages or 3 pages, that's fine. But challenge yourself. See if you can get it.
Yeah.
Hey, give yourself an open book assignment. Say, I'm going to write everything I need to write about these 3 styles with my book right here. See if you can get it into 1 page, even with an open book. And I bet you can. Cut out words that you don't need. Anytime you mention, like I said, anytime you mention stout, the word stout, and you're in a stout column, you've just wasted a word, and you've wasted writing time, and you've cramped up your hand that one word more.
Thank you for answering that one. Since that was my question. The next one is mine too, so I'm going to skip it. We got one for Jim. Let's see, where's the link for the download? And you've already posted that one. So
Tom, looks like Tom answered him.
Yeah,
it looks like.
Appreciate that. But for the sake of him, we'll say it looks like you've got that answer already, Jim, though. Thanks for your question. Now, the next one is from Jeremy Olson.
Jeremy.
Oh, you do? Cool. Will writing out a recipe using your recommendation in the study guide with standard ingredients, simple recipes, all hops at 5% AA, etc., before enough for a master score level on that question? Or does that need to be more in-depth details of ingredients?
Right, depends on who is grading. I will tell you that if you use I think in the dummies guide I spend the most pages going over this recipe question. I think there's plenty of detail in there. I think if you use that form that I provided and you make the assumptions that I've suggested you assume, like I said, all hops at 5% alpha acid, things like that, there's really no way they can argue with you. They being the graders, they can say, do the math. If you assume that my Columbus hops are 5%, of course, who has Columbus hops at 5%? But you assume that, okay, I need 6 ounces of Columbus hops for my double IPA at 5%. But if you make that assumption, they can't argue with you that you're wrong. Somebody might say, oh, that might yield a beer that's a little grassy. Yeah, but does it fulfill the requirements of the recipe question? I would argue yes. I think that form is pretty detailed. And if you can remember all the 18 things, remember the 18 elements in the recipe. And the form itself goes into great more detail than just the 18 elements. You'll have to look at it and check it out. Again, Jeremy and anybody else who wants to do this, try using the form. Give yourself 15 minutes, write a recipe, try using the form, and then push that to the side, and then give yourself another 15 minutes and try writing it out in prose.
Again, it sounds like our bigger risk is not getting through, so it's almost better. We're better off to be the bare minimum and come back, as you said, and then guilt arose.
Yep. You only have 15 minutes to write the recipe, whether you use prose or the grid. Okay. So,
thank you, Jeremy. That was a great question. We have 2 more. Let's see. This is from Tom Heish. I'm sure I've screwed that up. All right. Some characteristics are the root cause, acetaldehyde, phenolic. Some are perceived effects, such as buttery or fruity. Should we approach these differently?
I had never thought of that question before, so good job, Tom. I would say no. Just say, in your grid or your prose, whichever you choose, say that acetaldehyde is the root cause of apple tasting beer, green apple tasting beer. Where, as you say, buttery is an effect of a covered boil. In other words, you just define it just the way you have here, and you'll get maximum points, I would suspect.
And then we have one last question, unless somebody jumps in with it. This one is from me. Learning the styles comparison appears overwhelming. Are there any approaches you'd recommend to methodically beat your way through this one? I'm looking for that hack.
Yep, you're right. You're right. It's overwhelming. That's the answer. But as we talked about earlier, create yourself some flashcards. And hey, if somebody wants to go through the work of creating flashcards, I think on the 2004 style guidelines, one of my compatriots here in the Twin Cities created these very flashcards we're talking about, and the BJCP published them. So now there's new styles. So somebody's got to create new flashcards. If you do that, share them with us. You know, it's a lot of cut and pasting, but it would be I think it'd be a great service if somebody wants to do it.
And thanks, Tom. It is a nice beer. It tastes good too.
Tom, are you the brewer from that brewery?
Don't know. Nope. He says not. This is Pitt Street. Again, no relation, just happens to be one I grabbed. All right. So I think we are done with our questions. I've got a couple of things in our close to cover. And so we are actually done here, folks, as soon as I could figure out how to click all these buttons and get some screens to go away. So again, this is the first of a series that I hope to be doing for those of us that are aspiring to be BJCP nationals. We hope to do more. We hope we can talk Al into doing some more. So if you were excited and enjoyed this, please write in the chat. Let Al know how much you appreciated this, and maybe we can twist his arm into doing this again.
Send checks. Send Pliny the Elder. Anything you got, that's all good.
So let us know about that. And we don't have a schedule for how frequently we'll do these yet. But if you know of someone, Al's done a great job, but there might be some others that are just subject matter experts that you think would be good, or maybe you yourself would like to be on here and add to our expertise in the study group. I hope you will make that suggestion. So again, we'll wrap up. I'm Doug Piper, and this is Al Boyce, our Grandmaster 7, and we appreciate his time very much. So with that, we'll wrap up, and Al, I'll give you a call.
A lot of fun, guys. Good luck on the test.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And send me your feedback on the dummies guide.
All right. Everybody have a great day, and cheers.